After racing concluded in Day 2 of the PRADA Cup, a COVID-19 update statement was released by the America's Cup Event Limited. It read, "As a result of the government announcement of a Level 3 lockdown in Auckland, initially for 72 hours, the next scheduled race day on Wednesday has been postponed and the event village will not be open to the public during this time. America's Cup Event Limited will be working with the authorities and relevant agencies over the next few days to work through the ongoing ramifications. So, please stand by early next week for further updates." Meanwhile, here is what happened in races 1 and 2 of the PRADA Cup. Today we saw the first races in the PRADA Cup, which will find who challenges Emirates Team New Zealand in the 36th America's Cup. We follow it from the perspective of Richard Gladwell, who is the editor of sail-world.com. Richard wrote, "The weather gods were once again doing their bit to help Auckland tourism, but less so the sailors and spectators, of the opening race of the PRADA Cup final. A stunningly sunny day had seen what was a good sailing breeze of 12 to 14 knots, drop down to around 8 knots, at the bottom of the course, reducing towards the top section of the racetrack. It was fighting a sea breeze from the west coast that was blowing a healthy 15 knots before the 4:15 p.m. scheduled start, which was delayed several times waiting for the wind to settle. With the breeze struggling to overcome its rival on the west coast, the question was whether INEOS Team UK had overcome their Achilles heel of struggling to foil in the light, a flaw that was so evident in the America's Cup World Series in December. The alarm bell started ringing when the team chased boat through Britannia tow line, and the Brits had to be towed onto the foils, and then started sailing in the minimum wind strength sea breeze, which began to build into something more solid about 15 minutes into the race. Hear how the racing unfolded in race 1. Most sailing fans were expecting a serious showdown in the first pre-start, as two of the most aggressive skippers lock horns in race 1, however, they were to be disappointed as the light winds, perhaps made the helmsman a little tentative when it came to engaging in the pre-start. There had been some speculation about whether it would have been more advantageous to have gained direct entry to the final, or to go through the semi-final repechage. INEOS, victors of the round-robin stage, gained direct entry and an extra week in the boat shed to make some modifications and polish the boat. Luna Rossa spent that week racing and polishing their boat handling, as was the lot of Luna Rossa. At the time, INEOS seemed happy to take the week in the shed, however, they made a pretty rusty start to the final series. Ben Ainsley and crew entered the start box early, and earned a penalty before Luna Rossa could even take a look at them, and then fell off the foils. The result was that they handed Spithill, Bruni, and crew a 700 meters lead before they could get underway. Luna Rossa sailed a clean if uneventful first beat, doing the bare minimum of maneuvers and rounding the mark 120 in front. The breeze looked to be building as the afternoon got warmer and the north-northeasterly sea breeze gained supremacy over the southwester. With the boats 800 meters apart on the course, Luna Rossa were allowed to resume their usual formula of sailing the shifts and only putting a loose cover on their opponent. INEOS looked under pressure, picking up a boundary penalty and seemingly struggling to foil through the maneuvers. By the bottom gate, they had dropped another 16 seconds to be 1:36 behind. The boat's speed edge went to Luna Rossa by a knot or so upwind, but the VMG difference was a much more significant 3 knots, showing that Luna Rossa was a bit faster, but able to sail a lot higher. Looking at the tracks of the boats, Luna Rossa were also able to sail a lot higher out of the tacks than INEOS, who appeared to require a big speed build, before and after each maneuver, in order to maintain their ride height on the foils. By the top mark, the delta had ballooned out to 156. On the subsequent downwind, Luna Rossa was now far enough in front that they could completely ignore their opponent, and concentrate on staying in phase with the oscillations of the breeze. By now the breeze had stabilized to average 14 knots and rotated around to 15 degrees to the right. This spelt bad news for the trailing INEOS as it made it a one-way racetrack, shutting down most potential passing lanes. As the wind speed increased, the speed difference between the boats started to erode, with INEOS dropping just 10 seconds in the last 2 laps. For race 2, it is likely that we will see a much closer fought battle. Then on to race 2. With the breeze up, the jibs changed and a fresh set of grinders on board INEOS, we were in for a different race. The breeze had increased to an average of 17 knots, peaking at 20 knots according to the live weather station on Bean Rock Lighthouse in Auckland Harbour, Immediately obvious was the difference in the size of the jibs, with Luna Rossa choosing a much smaller headsail than the British boat. It seemed to be a good call with no shortage of power as they entered the start box. Still, spectators were left waiting for a punchy pre-start. Limited engagement from either helmsman saw the boats start side by side with INEOS ahead and to leeward getting the better of the start. Luna Rossa decided they couldn't live on INEOS' hip, and elected to bail out what seemed to be a little early and head for the right-hand boundary. When they came back together, the power of the right, Luna Rossa crossed just a couple of boat lengths in front. At the second cross their lead had grown to a little over 100 meters. If Luna Rossa still had a speed advantage, it was nothing compared to what they had enjoyed in race 1. As they rounded the mark, the delta was just 11 seconds. INEOS opted for an early jibe, seeking a split, but Luna Rossa kept a tight cover and went with them. There was little to speak of in terms of boat speed between the boats, but it seemed that Luna Rossa had found the better breeze, and pulled out around 5 seconds. At the bottom mark, INEOS were allowed their first real split. Keeping both boards down around the mark for a long time, they turned very tightly as they rounded up. Luna Rossa, who initially had gone for the right-hand side of the course, chose to come back across to the left, and as they crossed INEOS they were around 180 meters in front. INEOS didn't have a brilliant top half of this beat. After having got back into Luna Rossa in the first half of the leg, they handed back all they had gained and more, now rounding 19 seconds back. Luna Rossa appeared to have picked the better of the marks to round and set off downwind in a decent puff of wind. Luna Rossa surged out to a lead of more than 450 meters, but INEOS found their own zephyr that propelled them down towards the bottom gate at pace, holding the deficit at the bottom mark at 16 seconds. As they began the final lap of the second race, INEOS was facing a deficit of 250 meters. Luna Rossa slotted back into the traditional match racing tactics of close covering their opponent, always tacking to position themselves directly upwind of INEOS. Ainsley appeared now to realize that he wasn't going to beat the Italians with boat speed, so put in a few extra tacks to tempt them into making an unforced error, but Spithill and Bruni's boat handling was as slick as ever, rounding the top mark and heading for home with an advantage of 26 seconds. A smooth downwind saw Luna Rossa go up 2-0, in the race to 7 victories. INEOS clearly stepped their game up between the ACWS and PRADA Cup round robin. But after dropping a race in light winds and then another in stronger winds, the question has to be asked, have they spent their chips?
It's going to be a fantastic fight. I mean, that's why you compete, because you want to be up against the best and you want to challenge yourself and you want to be in those situations. I fully expect we're going to have some amazing racing over the next week or so.
It's a long series, there's lots of races, we're racing a really, really good team.
The battle for the right to challenge Emirates Team New Zealand for the Old Mug starts now.
First race, pretty light winds, and unfortunately we weren't able to get the boat foiling in the pre-start, and ended up being quite a big jump to the Italians straight off the line.
And it's Luna Rossa in command from the go.
There's no way back into the race. Second race was much closer, some good breeze came in, to 13, 15 knots. We had a nice start, and it's a bit of a split coming off the line.
Race 2 is a go in the PRADA Cup Final Series 2021. What a start!
The Italians seem to have just a little bit more pace than us around the course. They sailed really well, and there weren't that many wind shifts, there weren't many passing lanes, so after that wasn't a whole lot we could do. So frustrating day really, because we worked hard to try and get the performance of the boat going, particularly in the lighter airs, and still got a long way to go in this series. We've got to keep pushing hard.
Okay, 2, 1, up.
I think we're going to have to look at what tweaks we can make to the boat, but yeah, if there's anything we can do to get more performance out of the boat, we'll be doing it.
Sunday, February 14th was day 2 of the PRADA Cup, and the weather was stunning for racing. Here's how Richard Gladwell of sail-world.com saw the action. Tucked away today. On the most eastern course E, Luna Rossa Prada Pirelli and INEOS Team UK resumed battle in Auckland. After a shaky start, Ben Ainsley and crew really had to get some points on the leaderboard. The Hauraki Gulf, which translates to northerly wind, lived up to its name today with solid 18 to 21 knots on the usual race courses, which prompted race officials to move down to course E, affectionately known as the back paddock, where the breeze is a more sedate but shiftier 10 knots. Into whose hands this will play remains to be seen. INEOS relies strongly on the tactical nous of Giles Scott, who is unique among the challengers in his role as a dedicated tactician. Luna Rossa on the other hand will have Jimmy Spithill and Francesco Bruni, sharing the roles of helmsman and tactician, as well as traveller and rudder rake control. Here's how the day unfolded. Race 1. Finally we got to see some argy-bargy in the pre-start between Spithill and Ainsley. INEOS set up to leeward of Luna Rossa, and aimed for the hook, as the boats made their way back to the start line, but Luna Rossa paced up and got clear ahead of them. INEOS dropped back a couple of boat lengths, and tacked away. Luna Rossa slammed a tight cover, and went with them, both boats starting on port, heading for the right-hand boundary. The boats so far seemed much more evenly matched today. When they tacked at the boundary, Luna Rossa stayed ahead and led back all the way to the port boundary about 60 meters in front. This was the first real lineup we have seen where the boats were content to sail side by side, attempting to gain an advantage in pure speed and height over the opponent rather than looking for different breeze. INEOS looked to have a much better high mode and was making inroads when they tacked short of the boundary. Luna Rossa carried on to the boundary and the ley line, making it to the top mark with a couple less maneuvers and stepping out to a lead of more than 100 meters in the top portion of the course. The delta at the mark was 9 seconds. Downwind boat speeds were very even, the boats locked at 140 meters apart. If there is any difference between the two was in the maneuvers. Luna Rossa seemed to gain a boat length or so every time they tacked or jibed. Luna Rossa rounded the bottom mark 9 seconds ahead again, but it seemed much closer than it was at the top mark. Luna Rossa rounded the left-hand gate, and extended to that side of the course, where INEOS went for the same gate but kept both foils down and rolled straight into attack, effectively completing a 180-degree turn, at 40+ knots. Despite only holding a narrow lead, Luna Rossa initially seemed happy to let INEOS split from them, and instead of following Luna Rossa out to the left, they continued to the boundary. As they came back together, Spithill and Bruni executed a textbook slam dunk, tacking directly in front of INEOS and forcing them to do another tack, having barely accelerated back to race speed after their previous tack. This was now a real match race. Luna Rossa was clearly faster through the maneuvers, eking out an advantage of 180 meters. They must have seen their advantage and were keen to press it home, forcing INEOS to either sail in the wash behind Luna Rossa's wing sail or tack again and again, bouncing off the boundary and never really getting to stretch their legs and accelerate. This was perhaps the closest thing we have seen to a classic match race between two AC-75s. Luna Rossa rounds the mark in front again, their lead stretching out to 18 seconds and 320 meters. If INEOS is going to have a chance in this series, they need to start taking the races to Luna Rossa. Thus far they have let Spithill and Bruni dictate terms and sail where they want to, leaving INEOS to sail in the less desirable part of the race course. A brilliant leyline call at the bottom mark was nearly spoiled by a less than stellar JK, which is what Spithill and Bruni call attack rounding at the bottom mark. They set off upwind still ahead, but gave most of their lead back to INEOS, who were back to within 9 seconds behind. While that JK wasn't particularly fast, it did put the Italians in a nice position to windward of INEOS, who had made a traditional rounding at the other gate. This meant that as they approached the boundary, Italy could tack slightly early and set themselves up to be directly in front of the Brits, forcing the recommencement of their tacking duel from the previous lap, though this time they were working INEOS up the right-hand boundary. As before, at each tack INEOS would hand Luna Rossa a further 10-meter lead. There were more tacks in the first half of this leg than there were in whole races earlier in the regatta. As they entered the last 500 meters of this beat, Luna Rossa was out to a lead of 150 meters and set up in a very controlling position at the starboard ley line, giving INEOS no choice but to follow directly behind them, as they headed into the final mark rounding. In a reminder about the G-forces on board these boats, A very loose jibe for INEOS saw Giles Scott sliding backwards and uphill across the deck, as the crew rushed to jibe, as he was crossing the boat. Luna Rossa sailed a clean final run, with loose covers to stay between the British and the bottom mark. This was a much closer race than most of what we have seen in the PRADA Cup, yet Luna Rossa remained well in control, going up 3-0 in the series. Race 2. Another must-win start sequence for INEOS saw them pointing skywards thanks to a foil control issue, a mishap that was accompanied by some thoroughly un-British language over the onboard communications. Luna Rossa was again left to start unhindered and jumping out to a 100 meters lead. This opened the door for Luna Rossa to set up another tight cover, pinning the British boat against the right-hand boundary in second race that promised to be fairly intensive for the grinders. Luna Rossa maintained their lead, easily covering INEOS and staying locked in at 150 meters behind for almost the entire leg. They would round the first top mark 12 seconds ahead. Luna Rossa was following the match racing instruction manual to the letter, staying directly between the man and the mark. The boats appeared to be incredibly evenly matched in these conditions, so while the delta at this stage was only 150 meters, it looked to be a commanding lead, one which INEOS didn't appear in a position to do anything about. The onboard communications, however, from INEOS were very relaxed, so perhaps they knew something that wasn't evident to the spectator about their prospects of picking up their first race win of the series. Again, the delta at the bottom mark was 10 seconds, and again the Brits went for the JK tack rounding, setting off for the left-hand boundary, followed shortly after by Luna Rossa, who looked in the box seat to set up another strangle hold for the beat to windward. INEOS earned themselves a boundary penalty as they tacked back towards the center of the course. Ainsley didn't feel it was warranted, and the virtual eye graphics suggested they did not breach the boundary. Another leg of follow the leader made for uneventful watching, which would have suited Luna Rossa supporters just fine. The differential had slowly slipped out to approaching 250 meters by the time the boats reached the top mark, with the breeze appearing to moderate slightly. As they rounded the mark, Luna Rossa had extended out to 21 seconds. A big right-hand shift of almost 20 degrees played perfectly into the hands of Luna Rossa, who jumped out to a lead of 500 meters, looking for a moment like they might make it down to the mark without jibing, but the breeze flicked back and forced a double jibe near the bottom so that they could get to the left-hand mark and back to their favored side of the course. By now it was clear that if INEOS was to win this race, Luna Rossa had to make an unforced error. They were now far enough ahead that they could do what they wanted, pick their shifts and step out to a 500 meters lead, rounding the final mark more than 35 seconds ahead. By now it appeared that INEOS was fresh out of ideas on how to get around Luna Rossa. Their strategy and demeanor very reminiscent of the ACWS at the end of 2020. This performance begs the question, is Luna Rossa sailing a significantly faster boat, or are they just sailing perfect races? Is it just a case of INEOS winning a few starts to turn this around? Or are they in a deeper hole? Luna Rossa goes up 4-0.
Yesterday wasn't the start that we wanted to get to this series, but we've really developed a good system of just analysing the day. We're feeling as good this morning as we were yesterday morning. It's windier out there and we're on a different race course. We just want to go out there and have a tight yacht race, and I think that's what's going to suit us.
Going for the hook here?
Yeah. Edge. Stop edging.
Killing 10. Killing 4 at the pin.
Yeah, it's a tough day. We felt the boat was going pretty well, but unfortunately we had 2 bad starts.
Race number 3, 2021.
The Italians sailed pretty faultlessly all day. They didn't give us an opportunity to get back into the race. Yeah, frustrating.
Not only do we see a boat race, but we see an aggressive match race going on right now.
INEOS have to attack straight away.
You know, they defended really hard.
Race 4, PRADA Cup final 2021. And another mistake at the start by INEOS Team UK.
Loads of tacking duels and classic match racing, which is good to see.
But Luna Rossa aren't giving them much space. They're going to have to sail a bit of batter here and tack back again.
I'm frustrated. I'm not happy with how we sail today, how I sail today. No, we can do a lot better than that, and we've got to, because we've got to get back into these guys. So yeah, we'll think hard about the approach, what we need to do better, how we're going to do that, and like I say, we'll come back fighting.
Good effort, guys. Sorry it wasn't better.